Robert Palazzo. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at UAB, and it's my privilege to introduce our Ireland Distinguished Visiting Scholar for this year, Dr. Leon Botstein. As many of you know, Dr. Botstein is president of Bard College in New York and has been the president since 1975. But his administrative career began even earlier when, at the age of 23, having completed his undergraduate studies at the University of Chicago, he was asked to assume the presidency of Franconia College in New Hampshire. That appointment made him the youngest college president in U.S. history and set him on the course of academic leadership that he continues today as president of Bard, and also as chairman of the board at Central European University in Budapest, Hungary. Along with his significant academic responsibilities, Dr. Botstein is the musical director and principal conductor of the American Symphony in New York, a position he has held since 1992. For a time, he was also the musical director and principal conductor of the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra, and he remains their conductor laureate. He is also the founder and co-artistic director of the Bard Music Festival. Widely published in both English and German, Dr. Botstein is known for his significant contributions to musicology and music history. He is also known for his educational reforms at Bard College and at other public and private institutions, as well as for his ideas about the role that the humanities can play in our contemporary lives. In his wonderful essay, The Love of Learning, Dr. Botstein explores the barriers that prevent today's college students from experiencing a fulfilling, enriching, transformative education. At the heart of the issue is the definition of the, quote, usefulness, end quote, of a humanities education, and the tension that lies between, quote, learning for its own sake, end quote, and learning the skills to earn a living. How does one determine the value of a university education, particularly one that focuses on the humanities? These issues are at play on our own campus, in our community, and in our nation, and in the larger world. And so we look forward to exploring these issues with Dr. Botstein today. Please join me in giving him a warm UAB welcome. So we are very fortunate to have you here today, and I'd just like to maybe just open the session with your thoughts and your opinions, and how do the humanities actually contribute to a student's intellectual development, and how do these studies actually prepare these students for the future?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me, and thank all of you for coming. If I'd been in your shoes, I might have elected not to come, and this is my second time in Alabama. I discovered that I had been a visitor years ago at Auburn University, which, since I flew into Atlanta, Georgia, I, as a good ignorant northerner, assumed it must be in Georgia. But I understand from the football point of view, it's definitely in Alabama. So in answer to your question, my basic position is very simple. The idea that the humanities are useless is a false idea, and I've never believed in learning for its own sake. This is some invention that some gentlemen scholars invented to give their own vocation a kind of purity that was reserved for monks and priests. I've never known anybody to study for its own sake. It's a nonsensical idea. Why people do study is because if they get joy out of it, or a sense of value for themselves, it is utilitarian. So when you hear, which apparently the President of the United States poked fun at being an art history major, it's just simply not so much ignorance as it is a misunderstanding of what is useful. So when we have undergraduates who want to be engineers, who want to do something in the world that's useful, the question is, what do they need to know? That's always the best place to start. And it seems to me that what they need to know is considerable in terms of the non-technical information. A good idea, an innovative idea, is often from thinking about a question differently. And where do you get those habits of thought? And if you scratch the surface of any great scientist, you will not discover someone who knows nothing about the philosophical or the literary. You won't find somebody who is illiterate. You won't find somebody who actually doesn't have what we call a humanistic point of view or background. In the case of sometimes scientists, you'll find an artistic point of view. I had the pleasure years ago of writing a chapter on Einstein's relationship to music in a volume that Peter Gallison put out to celebrate the year 1905, when the great three papers were published, Brown in Motion and Relativity. And so it was fascinating that I came up with a hypothesis, which may be totally false, but it sounded good, that his taste in music really had a tremendous influence and also reflected a worldview, if you will, which he thought a lot about how the world must work, which is why he was always resistant to the generation of Niels Bohr and what then quantum mechanics seemed to show. He couldn't quite accept it. And the reason is that his aesthetic point of view was Mozartian. His really favorite music was early Beethoven and Mozart. And there was a sense of harmony, completeness, purposefulness to the way the structure of this music was done. That's what he really liked. He wasn't really much taken by romantic music, which seemed to be less clear in its formal argument. He was not very enamored of Wagner, so he had these aesthetic ideas. All I'm saying is that his training as a musician, which was not that great, but his general education was very sophisticated. And that goes for all the great scientific breakthroughs. And now there are some inventors. It's hard to know where they get their ideas from, but certainly the relation of design, the aesthetic, to modern technology is inseparable. So the creation of silos that serve our own professional training systems and are inherited from the history of the university and the history of disciplines are not necessarily coincident with what a young person needs to know. So, especially if one's going to be in the world of commerce and you're trying to sell people things. I'm always amazed that the creators of The Simpsons, arguably the most successful television pop culture series, all liberal arts trained graduates from major universities. So the idea that the humanities are useless is, I think, a position that very few serious scientists would take. And the public has been, in that sense, sold a bill of goods for which we, humanists, are responsible. We've aggressively tried to professionalize our disciplines. We think our value should be measured in the number of majors we have, which may not be the case at all. We have our own journals. We want to look like scientific disciplines. We have a system of peer review and publication counting as if we were in the cancer research business. And while that's okay, it's a good idea to a limit, it's no dishonor to think that the love of literature, the ability to read beneath the surface of a text, to interpret a text, to see aspects of structure and design, to develop visual literacy, to hear in a way critically, to think about philosophical questions in more than a commonsensical way. Those things are, things worth teaching people who end up doing something other than being professional humanists. And in some areas, we've tried to make our disciplines arcane in the way we speak about them, the way we write about them. Literature is particularly subject to this. So the irrelevancy is self-imposed. I say about classical music in my own field that the only way to protect it is to protect it from its own defenders. So we are partially to blame for the crisis of confidence in whether we have value, because the scholar in English who published the most recent book in literary criticism may, to some very well-educated person, appear not to be able to write the English language. And the prevalence of jargon, which may not be justified. So we've done some harm to ourselves in the glory days of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when there was an expansion of these disciplines, really since the Second World War. And we have to make a case to the public. And the case is not hard to make.
So, you pointed out two things I want to return to in a moment. The silo issue was one, but another one, I get a sense that, and maybe I'm wrong in this sense, but I'm getting the sense that possibly academics, the nature of the reward system and what we value, maybe squeezing the vibrancy right out of the very intellectual pursuit itself, turning it into a bit of a dull arena. And so the student response to that is, this is not interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are many problems like that. So let's start from the starting point. An undergraduate coming to a university. So an undergraduate curriculum, whether it's in a freestanding college or a college that has a graduate school associated with it, university, sees a political science department, an economics department, a sociology department, and a history department. The nutty thing is that they're interested in questions. They're not interested in fields. They wouldn't know really what a political scientist does as opposed to what a sociologist does. But they might be interested in the nature of politics and how political systems develop, or aspects of that. They might be interested in the relationship of different economic structures to how society is put together. They may be interested in urban life, rural life. The fascinating thing is that in order to graduate from these departments, you have to take courses in those fields that have a stamp called political science, economics. That's the way the distribution of resources is. Fact remains that from an intellectual point of view, it is a travesty how few economists know any history. How few historians know anything about economics. How few of either of them have ever thought about philosophy, when in fact Adam Smith probably saw himself as a philosopher more than anything else. So you have this professionalization which is at odds with the problem that a young person needs to be motivated to think about. So, and then there is a kind of artificial professionalization. It's amazing to me to read, for those of us who work as scholars in fields that cross over many other disciplines, it's fascinating to read how few art historians have ever thought about music history. And how few music historians who have spent their life worrying about, some very narrow event or set of events between 1820 and 1840, know anything about the architecture and visual arts of that period. That's implausible, absolutely implausible, because their subjects did know about the art of music. They did know about the literature. So this kind of segmentation is dangerous, particularly on the undergraduate, but very dangerous on the graduate level as well. it's astonishing how few scholars of literature are very worried about the history of music, which, given the preoccupations of an author like George Eliot, seems incredible.
So the intellectual waterfront is inappropriately carved and segmented, creating barriers that
Bureaucratically, yes.
that block the nimbleness of the young mind.
Because there's also, this is true of all kind of Mandarin professions which we are in, there is a kind of false assumption of authority that we, I once ran into a young faculty member that we had hired, and I had really not met this person. And so I was walking on campus and I knew this person was new, and I really never had met the person, so I stopped the person on the way to the faculty dining room, and I said, I introduced myself and I said, "How do you like it here?" And the person said, "Oh, I'm getting settled. I've been here about 3 months." I said, "How do you like teaching here?" And the person, a newly minted PhD, said to me in a very sort of aggressive voice, offended, said, "I'm not a teacher." So I was a little astonished. I said, I beg your pardon? He said, "I'm a professor." Now, the reason that our high school teachers are such a poor quality is because the social reward is so low. It's not that they're paid less than we are, but you can survive, your dignity is intact if you tell your neighbor that you're a college professor. You might even get into the country club if you can afford the dues. I've never been to a christening where a male baby is born and the parents say, "I hope he grows up to be a high school teacher." So the societal values begin, this is a dignified profession no matter how poorly we may be treated. And that is the idea of being a professor. So that is an implicit provision of authority. And actually what we're teaching is curiosity. So you get a job. Science is a little bit different because the problem is so important. You know very well as a biologist that if you have to learn a lot of physical chemistry to solve a problem, you're going to learn it. You're going to go over to the physical chemist, obnoxious as they may be from your point of view, and tell them, "Listen, I need to know how to do this."
I didn't know you were a mind reader as well.
Yeah, I know exactly. So you know that if there's a bit of mathematics you need to know to solve a problem, you're not going to worry about it. You're going to go over without any fear and say, "How do you do this?" You know, modern biology was started by physicists who got bored with their own problems, Max Delbrück and Szilard, and they went as adults and said, "You know, the biologists, tell me what you know. Tell me all this stuff about genetics and about cells." You know, they were physicists, not biologists, because the problem rules. The problem is dominant, not the discipline. And so you have to know a lot of things, you know, my earlier generation didn't need to know. It's because the problem has gotten more refined or you're further along to solving it. And that kind of natural curiosity is killed by what we do, by the reward system, the way we hire, where we evaluate, and we tenure someone. So someone who is working on problem X, who realizes, well, he or she has to study a field which they didn't learn in graduate school, needs to spend some time figuring this out, it's not really encouraged. And they have to be the voice of authority. Whereas a scientist is taught much more easily in the university to say, "Well, I really don't know. Don't know the answer to this. In fact, I'm not sure we have the right answer for it." And so there's a culture in the humanities which has militated against focusing on the problem and the issue, as opposed to the discipline, and a kind of a fear-driven assertion of authority on the assumption that mannerism will end up increasing your chances for promotion and tenure.